If you're tired of being disrespected, watch this story. Have you ever swallowed your words just to keep the peace? Have you ever let someone talk over you and said nothing? Have you ever walked away from a room feeling smaller than when you walked in? What if the way people treat you is not about who they are, but about what you have quietly allowed? Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because on this channel we share powerful life stories that teach lessons about courage, patience, dignity, and hope. This story may change the way you look at respect forever. In a small town, where the market opened before sunrise and closed only when the last lantern burned out, there lived a man named Samuel. Samuel was a porter. He carried sacks of grain, crates of fruit, whatever needed carrying, for whoever paid. Samuel had a quiet nature. He rarely raised his voice. For years, people mistook his quiet nature for weakness, and Samuel let them. If a trader shorted his pay, Samuel said nothing. If a customer shouted at him for being too slow, Samuel apologized. If someone cut in front of him in line, Samuel simply stepped back. He told himself it was easier to bend. He told himself arguing wasn't worth it. He told himself someday people would notice his hard work and treat him better on their own. They did not. Samuel carried the heaviest loads for the lowest pay. Other porters learned to ask for more, to refuse unfair jobs, to speak firmly when a trader tried to cheat them. Samuel never did. He believed staying quiet made him easy to work with. Instead, it made him easy to use. One afternoon, a trader named Mr. Kofi handed Samuel a sack far heavier than agreed, for the same low price as always. Samuel opened his mouth to object. Then he closed it again, and lifted the sack onto his back without a word. His younger cousin, Peter, watched this happen more than once. Peter was also a porter, newer to the market, but bolder. He often asked Samuel gently why he let people speak to him the way they did. Samuel always gave the same answer. "It's not worth the trouble," he would say. But the trouble found him anyway. Slowly, other traders began treating Samuel the way Mr. Kofi did. They shorted his pay a little more each week. They raised their voices when he was only a few seconds late. They gave the easier, better-paying jobs to porters who spoke up for themselves and left the hardest work for Samuel. At home, it followed him too. Samuel's own neighbors borrowed tools and never returned them, borrowed money and forgot to repay it, because they knew Samuel would not ask twice. His silence, which he once believed was patience, had quietly become an invitation. One evening, Samuel's wife, Comfort, found him sitting outside their small home, staring at nothing. She asked him what was wrong. Samuel did not answer right away. "I worked 12 hours today," he finally said, "and I came home with less than I was promised." Comfort sat beside him. She did not scold him. She simply asked one question, the kind that lingers long after it is spoken. "Samuel," she said, "when did you last say what you actually felt?" Samuel opened his mouth to answer. Nothing came out. He could not remember. That night, Samuel lay awake beside his sleeping wife, turning the question over and over. He thought of every unfair sack he had carried, every shout he had swallowed, every time he had shrunk himself smaller just to avoid trouble. He realized slowly that the trouble had come anyway. It had simply worn a different face. For the first time, Samuel did not know who he had become. The low point came on a hot afternoon in the crowded market square. Mr. Kofi, in front of a dozen other traders and porters, accused Samuel of stealing a sack of maize that had simply been miscounted. He shouted. He pointed. He called Samuel careless, lazy, dishonest, loud enough for the whole market to hear. Samuel stood frozen, sweat running down his back, the accusing eyes of strangers fixed on him. He wanted to speak. He wanted to defend himself. But years of silence had left his voice buried so deep, he could not find it in time. He simply lowered his head and walked away, the laughter of a few onlookers trailing behind him. That evening, Samuel sat alone by the river outside town, the accusation still ringing in his ears. He thought of every time he had stayed quiet, hoping silence would earn him peace. Instead, it had earned him a reputation he never deserved and never defended. For the first time, Samuel understood. His silence had not protected him. It had left him defenseless. He sat there long after dark, the water moving past him, indifferent to his shame. The next morning, an old woman named Auntie Efua found Samuel sitting on the same riverbank, staring at the water. Auntie Efua had once been a market trader herself, known across the region for never once being cheated, and never once raising her voice to do it. She sat beside him without asking permission, the way old women who have lived long enough often do. "You carry heavy things all day," she said, "but the heaviest thing you carry is the silence." Samuel looked up, surprised. He said nothing, because he still did not fully trust his own voice. Auntie Efua continued. "Respect," she said, "is not requested. It is declared. One honest word at a time." Samuel frowned. "I don't want trouble," he said quietly. "You already have trouble," Auntie Efua replied. "You simply call it peace." Her words landed harder than any insult Mr. Kofi had ever thrown. Samuel sat with them in silence, because for the first time, silence felt like agreement, not safety. "So what do I do?" Samuel finally asked. Auntie Efua's answer was simple, the way real wisdom often is. "Every day," she said, "say one true thing out loud to the person it concerns. Not shouted, not angry, just true. If a price is unfair, say so. If a task is too heavy, say so. If someone wrongs you, say so calmly to their face." It sounded too small to matter. Samuel almost said so. But he thought of the marketplace, the laughter, the years of swallowed words that had built the very trouble he feared. So he nodded and decided to try. The next morning, a trader tried to hand Samuel a sack heavier than agreed. Samuel opened his mouth, his heart pounding. "This is more than we agreed," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I'll carry it, but the price should reflect the weight." The trader blinked, surprised, then simply nodded and adjusted the price without argument. Samuel walked away, stunned by how small the moment had been, and how large it felt inside his chest. He tried again the next day with a different trader, and this time his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The trader ignored him completely, and Samuel carried the unfair load anyway, his face burning with embarrassment. He almost gave up. He told himself Auntie Efua's advice was too small to undo years of being overlooked. But he remembered the market square, Mr. Kofi's voice, the laughter that followed him home. And he tried once more. On the third day, Samuel spoke up when a customer tried to rush him without paying the agreed fee. His voice was steady this time. The customer paused, then paid in full, muttering an apology under his breath. It was the first time in years someone had apologized to Samuel instead of the other way around. Something in his chest loosened, just slightly. Not healed. Just loosened. Days became weeks. Samuel kept speaking one true thing every day, calmly, without shouting, without apologizing for having a voice. Slowly, he corrected unfair prices. Slowly, he refused loads too heavy for the pay offered. Slowly, traders began speaking to him differently, not because he had grown louder, but because he had grown clear. Mr. Kofi, who once shouted accusations across the market square, began greeting Samuel with a nod instead of a command. Other porters started asking Samuel how he had done it, how he had changed the way people treated him without a single fight. Weeks became months. Samuel's neighbors, who once borrowed tools without returning them, began asking first, and returning them without being reminded. Comfort noticed her husband standing taller, speaking clearer, walking home some evenings with his shoulders back instead of bowed. One afternoon, Samuel calmly refused a job that paid far less than the work deserved. The trader argued at first, then agreed to Samuel's price, simply because Samuel did not flinch or apologize while stating it. Months became a year. Samuel was no longer the easiest porter to underpay. He became known, instead, as the porter whose word could be trusted, and whose price could not be pushed lower by shouting. Years later, Samuel trained younger porters arriving in the market, teaching them the same simple habit Auntie Efua had once taught him. He told them plainly, the way she had told him, that silence does not earn respect. Honesty does. If a young porter was underpaid, Samuel stood beside him while he spoke up for the first time. If a trader tried to shame a newcomer publicly, Samuel calmly corrected the record, without raising his voice. One evening, Mr. Kofi approached Samuel privately, something he had never done before. He admitted, quietly, that he had misjudged Samuel for years, mistaking his silence for weakness he could exploit. Samuel did not gloat. He simply nodded and extended his hand. Auntie Efua, now much older, still visited the riverbank some evenings. Samuel would sit beside her sometimes, the same spot where his silence had once nearly broken him. "You were right," he told her one evening. "It was never the world disrespecting me. It was the words I refused to say." Auntie Efua smiled, the smile of a woman who had watched a small seed grow into something whole. Listen closely, because this is the heart of it. Disrespect rarely begins with someone else. More often, it begins with our own silence, one swallowed word at a time. One unfair price accepted. One unfair shout absorbed. One quiet apology for simply existing. Real dignity is not staying silent and calling it peace. Real dignity is speaking the truth, even when your voice shakes. You do not need to shout to be respected. You need one small habit, repeated with honesty. Say one true thing. Say it calmly. Say it to the person it concerns. Do it again tomorrow. Samuel did not fix years of disrespect with one dramatic outburst, or one perfect argument. He fixed it one honest sentence at a time, the same way a single stone, placed again and again, builds a wall strong enough to stand. So let me ask you what Auntie Efua asked Samuel by that river. When did you last say what you actually felt? And just as important, what unfair price have you been quietly paying, simply to avoid trouble? Tell us in the comments, what is one honest sentence you need to say out loud starting today? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who deserves to feel their worth again. Because in the end, respect is not something the world hands you. It is something you build, one honest word at a time. Say it today.